gas, which was a cheap and horrible alternative provided for used in electric industry to prevent short circuits and accidents. The gas generated 23,500 times more warming than carbon dioxide. To put it in the right perspective, it was like 1 kilogram of gas warms the earth, the same extent as 24 people flying London to New York and return. Now, one small economic gain could do damage to the extent which I have indicated by giving you this example by Marat. It is a problem which is global. Climate change can never be a national subject. It has to be seen, it has to be dealt with globally and must be aimed at whether you act or you enact. All these two aspects must be at global level and they cannot be at national level. That's why it is rightly said that you may, today's date, as far as these two aspects are concerned, you may live nationally, but you will have to think globally if you want really what is the meaning of today's life. Now, if you will see that in the previous times, I was just in another webinar, Justice Michael, and probably he was very right in referring, where he said that we are advancing towards a disaster. Now, if that be the apprehension of the judicial minds, and he referred to one of the very important concepts, that was the judges as environmental managers. So if the judges have to adopt and the court system has to adopt and mold itself in a way that it must come in the process of day-to-day judicial determination of environment adjudication, that you will have a specific bent of mind to ensure that the climate change does not in any case get enhanced by virtue of undesirable human contribution, whether by violating the sustainable principle, whether by violating the precautionary principle. Once you violate these two, be sure you're inviting some serious problem. Now we will see that one of the thought process, if we consider, was considered when the global average CO2 emissions, equitable goals were advanced for in place of equal. The concept of intergenerational equity and public trust have long been dormant seeds, seldom wrapped into a fruit bearing tree for the future. That too, mostly by the courts in the countries and committees like EAPCA. Just to give you an example, let's talk of Himalayas. Now, Himalayas is not where India is concerned. There are 8 countries which are concerned with the Himalayan range. So they have a width of 120 to 250 miles, and they have a length or area of nearly 230,000 miles of area, which they cover. And now the most serious concern out of them that arises is the glaciers. The glaciers in this entire eco-sensitive area were being reduced at a rate which was very, very kind of inconvenient to proper minds who could analyze the impacts of damage to the natural resources on your climate change or global warming, whatever technology you may use, but the damage would be very immense. While dealing with this, I would definitely refer to, that as we just now mentioned, that there has to be an ecological governance by the courts. They have to participate. So that's one of the aspects, as I said, that in the topic you have to have the court's role is one and policy is another. Policy is never the subject matter of an adjudication, but the courts would have to be creative. They will have to be inventing and advancing the environmental jurisprudence so that it does not happen that it becomes too late for other authorities to wake up and act. So judicially can be very effective and very impactful in advancing the cause of prevention of adversity of climate change and global warming. This would be squarely covered under the doctrine of expansion of jurisdiction 1 and judicial creativity 2. Now, when I talk of these two, I certainly would very openly vouch for application of judicial activism within the framework of law. So that is one aspect we need to really care for. Now, there has been a very serious matter, and I would mention that case of, uh, Rohtang Pass, where the glaciers were being reduced at the rate of 1 kilometer per year. So you can imagine what will happen in 20 years. 20 meters of glacier would be lost. What impact it would have on your climate change and consequently on your day-to-day life, and what will be the heat generated. So you have, on the one hand, increase because of industrialization, increasing in the industrial progress and greenhouse gases increase. The carbon footprint is becoming a kind of taking a back seat. So on the one hand, your industrialization and your so-called development, which is indiscriminate, is causing global warming. On the other hand, you have a climate change which, besides the natural diminishing in its values, is also being aided by human interference to a large extent. Now, with this, when did I mention there were large number of directions passed? There's a time issue here, so I can't discuss that judgment in detail, but I would request the concerned attendees and everybody to do look at that judgment, because that took into consideration the economic effects, the management effects, the prevention precautionary principle effects, and very importantly, prohibitory orders for the purposes of causing restoration and regeneration of the natural resources of that area to ensure the climate change concept. Now, when we talk of policy making, the policy making is a very important facet we have in India. And of course, it is true across the globe because EIIs and the controlling authorities like pollution control boards are true across the border. So therefore, you have to have a policy at both levels, that is at the regulatory level as well as at the level of framing of policies. So the framers should be very conscious of ensuring that they are framing policies which are in consonance with the tilt towards the climate change and prevention of global warming. On the other hand, the regulators must ensure that they are effecting and regulating the policy framed in a positive manner without permitting serious damage to be done. Now, just to look at it, if you say the mitigation and the adaptation circumstances, if we talk of, the mitigation, as it is said, is to reduce, prevent the emissions of greenhouse gases on the climate. So that is a very simple principle we have. So that's why I told you that both these concepts would be applied together. Now, when we talk of mitigation of climate change, again, we have like you should take measures with regard to uh, substitution of fossil fuels. Then you have to have carbon trading. Then you must have the energy conservation. These are the three practical aspects, and that at the national levels, for example, when we talk first of because of the impacts of the industrialization at a very rapid phase, the Kyoto Protocol, it specifically dealt with industry countries to limit and reduce the greenhouse gases. The Montreal Protocol also considered it, and they said that there should be ozone layer protection, and out of production onerous substances, those substances which will generate greenhouse gases would be specified and controlled. So this continued with a effective manner in the Paris Agreement, then again in the 2019 Climate Action Summit, and then this is the international protocols, treaties, and conventions which have emphasized the need for protecting our climate. And basically, if you see the climate change and the global warming, both are incidental to our environment of natural resources. So we have to basically protect our natural resources, whether this water, whether it is forests, whether it is our eco-sensitive range of mountains, whether it is air. So you have to ultimately bring out to a clean environment in order to ensure that there is least damage done to all this. Now, the role of courts is more often than not referred with kind of a little criticism. The people, the authorities find it very difficult, that they think that authorities are the whole soul mindset of correct environmental creativity. They think that protection is their prerogative and nobody else can touch it. But let's not forget it. If we live it, I'm sure Brother Luke would be able to throw light on what he has contributed, his country has contributed towards this across Brazil. I can talk about UK, I can talk about US, how much effective, for example, the Hawaii Supreme Court is so effective on climate change cases. There are very few, but what is required in the effective manner today is that the courts should not. And now, if we look from the environmental jurisprudence growth in India, it has been fabulous. It has been one of the best progressive environmental jurisprudence in this country by the Supreme Court of India, by the National Green Tribunal, by the high courts. They have really touched very sensitive subjects and have always ensured that the people do not misuse their power, and they should not be permitted to range impact their economic benefits just to disadvantage of our day-to-day life. The impacts of climate change we are seeing today. For example, the studies show that it is going to be one of the most serious impacts on India would be on agriculture. And India, being an agricultural country, it has to be very cautious about impacts of climate change, because there are, the agricultural land is reducing by the day. And if the crops are going to be adversely impacted by climate change, then probably the agriculture activity would definitely affect even our economic growth. We have to analyze, and let's be very clear about that there have been definite cases in India with regard to climate change cases, whether they're related to glaciers, whether they're related to forests, whether they're related to general contribution of our day-to-day life towards, for example, if you burn a waste, it's a direct impact on climate. And so it is not that, you should deal waste only as a municipal solid waste affair and with no consequences. Certainly not. In my humble opinion, it's a matter which has a direct consequence and adverse impacts on environment and therefore on your climate change contributor. It becomes it generates carbon, it other matters. It is supposed to be cancerous, burning of waste and plastic, which is very serious. So therefore, one simple thing which you correct can be very positive for climate change. And if you don't, it can be very adverse for climate change and therefore can disturb your lives. The policy framers have to be very conscious, and therefore they should be the people who are trained, who are interested academically, and they must have appropriate data before they formulate policy for the purposes of preventing any damage to the climate and climate change. Climate change, as partly I said, is inevitable. You can't just expect always just one climate all through for generations. But various countries have contributed in their own way, and there has been a reference to various cases. For example, in the case of this post of Rika, there is a very important judgment on climate change, and where they went to the extent of that even direct damage is not only the consideration, indirect damage itself can be considered under the climate change cases. Then you had the Ethiopian government, which recently directed 350 million trees to be grown. So that is the contribution which is required. That is the consistency required. And that is why I think the Indian judiciary contributed a lot, particularly expanding the scope of Article 21 to the extent that even clean water was stated to be a right, fundamental right. So if that is the approach we have to take, naturally you can't get clean air, clean water until you let your climate be what it should be. The climate change is a question today which requires, and I would conclude by saying that climate change is a big question mark today, not for India, not for surrounding countries, but for the entire global family. We need to answer this question in the affirmative all the time and protect what can be a disaster for the humanity in the coming times. And I thank all of you.
Thank you so much, Justice Kumar. It's always a pleasure to hear you speak. And I think some of the issues that you touched upon, starting with the BBC article to the global importance of climate change and how it's not a national issue, but an international issue. The importance of creativity of judges, the importance of activism, how you yourself as one of the premier judges of the Supreme Court of India and as the chairperson of National Green Tribunal have sort of led the way in giving the desired importance to climate change, and how every country and human populace should come together and go by the laurels of Article 21, giving the right to clean and decent environment to every citizen. So thank you so much, Justice Kumar, for your talk. Just for our participants, I'd like to mention Justice Kumar referred to the Rohtang Pass judgment. The name of the judgment, as he rightly pointed out, is Durga Dutt Sharma versus State of Himachal Pradesh, in case anyone wants to look it up. We'll quickly move on to Justice Lavrysen, and we have been waiting for his talk for ever since he gave us the time. And over to you, Your Lordship.
So, thank you. So I have made a short presentation, and the topic I would like to speak about is climate change law in the European Union and its member states, and unfortunately also in its ex-member states when we talk about the United Kingdom. And now I have to see how it's going like that. So climate change is, of course, a global problem. And as you know, with the Paris Agreement of December 2015, which is in force since the 4th of November 2016, the world community has taken important engagements in terms of reduction of emissions, in terms of transparency and global stock taking, in terms of adaptation, and also in support of climate action for developing countries. I think you are familiar with this commitments. I will not go into the details now. But what is more important, that's not only the commitment, but what is happening in reality. And for that, I have to refer to the so-called emission gap report of 2019 of UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program. And I will list for you the main conclusions of that, I think, very important report. First conclusion is greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise despite scientific warnings and political commitments. And here you see the different countries on the graph, including India. Second, the G20 members account for 78% of those emissions, and collectively they are on track to meet their 2020 pledges, but these are limited. But 7 countries are currently not on track to meet the commitments they have made, the so-called national determined contributions. And for a further 3, it's unclear if they are on track or not. Happily for us, the European Union 28 member states and India are believed to be on track for the 2020 commitments. Only a few countries have so far formally submitted long-term strategies to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. But more and more countries are, however, announcing that they will strive at a net zero emission target for 2050, so that there are not more emissions than the sinks which are available. But there is a large emission gap. In 2020, annual emissions need to be 15 gigaton carbon dioxide equivalent lower than the current national determined commitments imply for the 2-degree Celsius objective. And even it should be 32 gigaton lower for the goal we're striving at. That's the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. If current commitments, national determined contributions, are fully implemented according to this report, we are going for an increase of the global temperature of 3.2 degrees Celsius at the end of this century. And for the consequences of this, we can refer to another important report of the IPCC, the special report on global warming of last year also. So, next message, we need to strengthen in a dramatic way the NDCs this year to go for the objectives for 2030, 40, and 50. So enhanced action by the members of the G20 will be essential for the global mitigation effort. And now the global mean temperature last year was already estimated to be 1.28 degrees Celsius above the average temperature of the late 19th century. And we can see every day the effects. It's not anymore future The effects, we can see it in terms of droughts and heat waves, hurricanes, floodings, fires. It's every day in different parts of the world. Let's look now to the European Union. What are the policies for the moment? For 2020, we have the so-called 2020 program. This means the European Union likes to reduce its emissions with 20% compared with 1990 towards the end of this year. And on that, the European Union is on track. So for the moment, one thinks the reduction will be a little bit higher, 23%. One likes to increase energy efficiency with 20%. And we like to increase the share of renewable energy till 20% at the end of this year. Next stage, 2030. For the moment, the commitments written in law are to reduce the emissions with at least 40% compared with 1990. And this has to be divided in three main sub-objectives. The first one is the objective for the so-called ETS sectors. So that's the emission trading system. So the sources which are covered by that mechanism. So that is the objective to reduce with 43% compared with 2005. Then the other sectors, the non-ETS sectors as they are called, they are regulated by the so-called effort sharing decision. This means that action must be taken by the member states itself, and together for those sectors, the idea is to reduce emissions with 30%. And for each member states of the European Union, there is a specific objective, and this objective must be implemented through so-called integrated national energy and climate plans, which must be reviewed periodically. And also the European Commission will look if member states are on track with implementing those programs. And last is the land use and forestry regulation for 2021 and 2030. So there the accounted emissions from land use must be entirely compensated by an equivalent removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through action in the same sector. That is what we call the no debit rule. The share of renewable energy must go up to at least 32%, and energy efficiency should be increased to with 32.5%. So that are the objectives which has been set some years ago. Last year, after the elections for the European Parliament, we got also a new European Commission, and this is, let's say, the daily government of the European Union, which is led now by Ursula von der Leyen. And that commission came up, I must say, with a very ambitious program, which is called the European Green Deal. And the idea is to increase the ambitions of the European Union. So for emission reductions, instead of 40% for 2030, which is now committed to, the European Commission is proposing to go for reductions going to 50 to 55% compared always with 1990. And on the long term, 2050, the aim is to get to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions within the European Union. How will the European Commission try to have an agreement on those objectives? This is through a European Union climate law, and the European Commission has tabled a draft of such a law. And what can you find in that draft? It said the long-term direction for meeting this 2050 climate neutrality objective through all policies, so in an integrated way, and it should be in a socially fair and cost-efficient manner. That's the basic idea. One tries also to create a system for monitoring the progress and for taking further actions if that is needed. The aim is also to provide predictability for investors and other economic actors and ensure that the transition to climate neutrality is irreversible. So this Green Deal is composed of lots of different actions, and one main objective is, of course, this climate neutrality towards 2050. So now this is a proposal of the new European Commission, but the European Commission as such has no power to decide on those objectives. It's the European Parliament together with the Council, and the Council, these are the members states. They are the lawmakers, so they have to decide on this proposal. So where are we now? The European Parliament will very likely back the project and is even proposing in some respects going a little bit further with the objectives. But of course, the main player is the Council, where the member states are gathering. And so the member states, the 27 for the moment, must agree with that, because this climate law must be adopted by unanimity by the member states. I must say, not all member states are enthusiastic with the proposal. Some of them are of the opinion that this program is too much ambitious, and that probably economic and social consequences will be high. And regrettably, I have to say that also my country is not 100% enthusiastic about the level of ambition. So the European Commission has proposed what is called a Just Transition Fund that will support the economies of member states which can be impacted by the measures, to help to agree on the proposal, and to help the member states to finance this transition towards a circular and a green economy. And another important question is, of course, what will be the consequences of the economic financial crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was already mentioned, certainly in the beginning of the lockdowns, we have seen that the environment was reviving, etc. But on the other hand, we see that the budgets of the states are under pressures, and also the budgets of companies are under pressures. So it still has to be seen if there will be enough, let's say, money to invest in this economic transition. And so the support of the member states is crucial, and also the implementation, because of course, if you have a European law on paper. That's just the first phase. Then the question of implementation comes. And I think an interesting development we see in some of the member states is that they have introduced a national climate change laws of a general nature. And the first one was the UK in 2008, but meanwhile followed with variations by different other member states. The last one last year was the Netherlands, also under the influence of the Urgenda case, court case, which was already mentioned. And the very last one is Germany. Also here, in my country last year, there was a proposal for such a climate law, but it has not been passed yet. So also there, some additional action is needed. So I think such national climate change laws can contribute to the implementation of global, European and national policies. And I think a very important feature of these different national laws is that they provide an independent committee composed of experts on climate, economics, and so on, which oversees government actions, which will, let's say, assess government policy, which will report on it. Are we on track? Should we do more? And they are reporting both to the parliament, both to the different stakeholders, and also the general public. And I think that's a very important feature to have, that you have independent review of governmental policies. And also, of course, parliamentary control. And these reports of these independent committees are helping, of course, members of parliament to do their job in controlling the government. And last point, of course, is the very importance of access to justice, that on the basis of those acts, that the people who are concerned can go to court if the obligations, the legal obligations, international, European, or on the national level, are not executed properly by the government, and that judicial review is possible, and that the judiciary has sufficient remedies to use in cases when the government is not functioning well. And my expectation is, Justice Kumar has already mentioned some important climate change cases all over the world, that we are just in the beginning of that, and that we will see much more of those cases coming in different parts of the world, including, I think, in Europe in the coming period, because we have, and I think the actual pandemic is just a small crisis compared with the climate crisis we are facing. So I think for the judiciary, for the legal profession, there is a lot of work in the years to come to help to fight this much more dangerous virus, I think, than the corona virus we are facing these days. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Justice Lavrysen. Again, we are extremely blessed to have such a well informed and experienced panel, because what Justice Lavrysen covered in 15 minutes of his talk is basically everything to do with climate change in today's world. So he's talked about internal dynamics. He's talked about ambitious goals. He's also talked about the financial crisis and its dictum in playing the larger role towards climate adaptation and mitigation. And ultimately, on a very positive note, he's kind of clarified that he's still hopeful that the judiciary around the globe, as Justice Kumar so poignantly put, is just beginning, and it's in its first strides towards achieving more activism, more climate adaptation, creativity in its decision making. And with this optimistic thought, I'd like to move on to Dr. Vivek Saxena. Before I do, though, I just want to let our participants know that we will, after Dr. Saxena's talk, we'll be going on to live questions and answers. So all of those who have questions, kindly raise your hands, enter the queue, and we'll take up the questions after Dr. Saxena's talk. Dr. Saxena, thank you for waiting for your talk, and I'm sure for all of us, it's absolutely worth the wait when we listen to you. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Eeshan. And first of all, let me thank organizers, Symbiosis University, Chandigarh University, Eeshan, and especially Professor Chandrasekhar for organizing this webinar on a very, very important thematic area and giving me an opportunity to share the panel with such an eminent jurist, Honorable Justice Swatanter Kumar ji and Honorable Justice Look. And we have already listened during their talk that with their vast experience, what they have contribution and the contribution for ecological governance and other issues in the day-to-day, how to discipline the various sectors through the various implementation of various directions, the policy regulations, and that has certainly addressed the environmental issues, especially in India, in a very, very effective manner in the past. And with Justice Swatanter Kumar sir, I have witnessed right from the beginning when the NGT was constituted, and the NGT has grown to such an heights that entire our ecological governance now in various sectors, maybe the government, maybe the policy makers, maybe the business people, they all have now started understanding that they have to integrate sustainability and environmental concerns into their practices. And especially also we listened to Justice Look, who shared the European Union experience. Now taking it further, let me share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir, very much.
Okay. So just what is the role of basically international organizations? So presently, I am working as a country representative of International Union for Conservation of Nature, which at the global level is playing a very significant role for the nature conservation, which ultimately addresses the mitigation as well as adaptation challenges. So before proceeding further, let me just briefly introduce about the IUCN. IUCN is the world's oldest environmental organization, which was set up in 1948, just after the World War, that time when people hardly used to talk about the environment. And it is the professional conservation network having more than 1,200 member organizations in 160 countries, more than now presently 15,000 voluntary scientists and experts who are members of the IUCN commissions. So IUCN work is organized into the 6 commissions: Red List Commission, the IUCN Commission on Environmental Law. So it is some sort of a neutral forum for the governments, NGOs, scientists, business, and local communities. And it is a unique hybrid organization because when we talk of different conventions, say climate change convention or biodiversity convention, in which the national governments, they are the parties to the convention. But in case of the IUCN, we have representation of the national governments also as a state member. We have a civil society organizations also. We have a specialized institutional members also. And one of the flagship knowledge product, apart from other many products, is the IUCN Red List. So once IUCN Red List process, in which we assess the species and categorize them as endangered, vulnerable, or various type of categories because of the various type of human impacts or maybe ecosystem related disruption, and that species, if their population is declining or if their habitat is degrading, and then when we categorize it into some particular category, then triggers the conservation action, and it ultimately helps various type of objectives which we know in the present day parlance when we talk of the climate change issues, the mitigation and adaptation. And another significant role of IUCN, IUCN has got the official observer status at the United Nations General Assembly. Because in United Nations General Assembly, nations speak of their respective national interests, but the voice of the environment and the voice of the species, it does not recognize any geographical boundaries. So that's why the IUCN plays a very significant role in shaping the global conservation agenda. In a journey of more than 70 years, IUCN has played a very significant contribution through the shaping up of the World Conservation Strategy, coming up of the 3 Rio Conventions, including the Climate Change Convention, Biodiversity Convention, now in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and different type of climate change negotiations. IUCN is playing a very significant role. And ultimately, when we look for the various type of environment-related challenges, the nature-based solutions, they are the key for any type of, you can say, interventions. And we have to look back to the nature to find the solutions. And in the upcoming World Conservation Congress, which will be held in January in Marseille, France, the nature-based solutions standards will be launched. Now, coming further, what type of problem we are facing when we are talking of the climate change mitigation and adaptation? If we see on the left side of the screen, we have a countries by the population size, and on the right-hand side, we have a, you can say, global economy of $80 trillion. And this population pressure that with the economy linked with it, it has created various type of increased anthropogenic or human footprints, which has caused various type of increase in emissions, disruption in the ecosystems, reduction in the ecosystem services. And that's why we are talking today, how to ensure this. And the next picture, just if you see, what are the problems? Human population, the cattle, the various type of emissions, the stubble burning, the degradation of the forest, waste disposal. You see, we degrade the land degradation, where industrial emissions. So we need to discipline ourselves in all these aspects if we really want to make this planet Earth livable and sustainable for the future generations. Because on the planet Earth, we have a number of species, and human being is one of the species. For our survival, we need nature, and nature has already a large number of species. So we have to ensure when whatever development pathway we choose, we have to be, it should be in symbiotic relationship with all the species, because all the species globally have an equal right. And taking it further, we have various type of ecosystems which provides us various type of care to us. And ecosystem services they provide, it itself takes care of how, in which species has to be located in which geographic region. And nature has itself decided such providing various type of climates for the best survival of those species, for purification of the water, the coastal areas, the marine species, the fisheries, carbon sequestration, and mangrove, coral reef, and all these. So nature has itself provided various type of solutions, and we have to respect the design of the nature. When we talk of the ecological governance, the governance should look back to the nature and find the solution. So these are the various type of now present day challenges when we are talking of the taking care of all the humanity, all the global population, climate change, food security, water security, human health, socio-economic development, disaster risk reduction, and ecosystem degradation and biodiversity loss. In the present day context, when we are facing the COVID pandemic, the human health has become one of the biggest factors. And one of the causes for this present pandemic is somehow rooted into the disruption of the ecosystems and disconnect with the nature. So coming to the next, what role basically the courts and judiciary can play in ensuring that we get our right to live in a safe and a cleaner environment, and that is the right to life. So if we see, we have number of sustainable development goals. We have to have harmonious relationship between the biosphere, which nature has provided, the society, which consists of all the population in the different geographic regions, and the economy for our further progress, the various type of development pathways we choose and develop the economy. And these linkages between these three, and also in the relation to the sustainable development goals, when we talk about 17 sustainable development goals and 169 targets, to address all these issues and challenges. If we see, already we have at the policy level government, when we talk of the ecological governance, we have Environment Protection Act, Forest Protection Act, CAMPA regulation, which was ultimately, and it was the intervention of Honorable Supreme Court, and it was a very historical initiative to ensure that whatever forests we for the development we lose, we have to ensure how to regenerate, how to replant. The waste management, the compliance of the waste management rules, Central Pollution Control Board and State Pollution Control Board, and many other administrative mechanisms, state forest departments and others. At the international level, we have number of conventions and the protocols ranging from the Climate Change Convention, Biodiversity, Desertification, Convention on the Migratory Species, the Convention on the Illegal Trade on Endangered Species, nationally determined contributions under the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and Aichi biodiversity targets and sustainable development goals. So the role of judiciary in India especially has been very, very significant and effective, and has played a very significant role in disciplining all the relevant stakeholders and ensuring the compliance. But at the same time, when we talk of various types of compliances, we have to have integration of the ecological ethics within ourselves. So that's why we have to ensure that we don't degrade the environment further. And some of the historical principles for the environmental and ecological governance, which have been reiterated already, and they are the basic core of all the environmental jurisprudence also. The precautionary principles, the polluter pays principles, the right to life through various judgments in the public trust doctrine. The number of judgments have been based on these principles. Now let me come to what the role IUCN plays in supporting the environmental law. IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law is a network of environmental law and policy experts from all regions of the world who volunteer their knowledge and services to IUCN activities, especially those of the IUCN Environmental Law Program. It has more than 1,400 members worldwide that include judges, prosecutors, government attorneys, private attorneys, law professors, and all others which are engaged in the Commission's work and mission. The Commission members represent every region of the world, and their interest and expertise, they span the full spectrum of environmental law, from pollution issues to those related to the biodiversity conservation. Now, taking it further, IUCN organized the first IUCN World Environmental Law Congress in April 2016 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And that declaration was based on it outlined the 13 principles for developing and implementing solutions for the ecologically sustainable development. So these 13 principles, their obligation to protect nature, right to nature and rights of nature, right to environment, ecological sustainability and resilience, in dubio pro natura, when in doubt, in favor of nature. So whenever we talk of anything and we have any doubt to find the solution, we have to look, and the nature has to be given precedence over every other thing if we have to follow this environmental rule of law and follow the future pathway for a sustainable environment for us. Ecological functions, intragenerational and intergenerational equity, gender equality, participation of minority and vulnerable groups, indigenous and tribal peoples, non-regression, progression. So these are the 13 principles which were part of the declaration during the first Congress on Environmental Law. And IUCN has also organized, when we talk of the climate change specialist group, which aims at providing policy and legal input to the IUCN and its members with respect to legal issues involving climate change and its adverse impacts. The global network of lawyers, practitioners, and professionals on cross-cutting disciplines, they are part of this specialist group. And some of the important projects which this specialist group have undertaken, they are related to the climate change mitigation and land use, getting to zero, study on the policy options, legal issues in implementation of the Paris Agreement, fighting climate change, a best practice guide for judges and courts, and the transition of the energy systems. Apart from this, to assist on various aspects of environmental law, IUCN has developed two tools. One is CLIMA. CLIMA is a guide to strengthening governance arrangements for mainstreaming and scaling up ecosystem adaptation. And it is built on 16 governance principles for ecosystem-based adaptation developed by the IUCN Environmental Law Center. And these principles have been grouped into 5 larger blocks to ease their understanding and use. These 5 blocks are flexibility, multidimensional coordination, ecosystem approach, public participation and equity, capacities, funding, and the rule of law. Another very important tool which IUCN has developed, that is EcoLex. It is a gateway to environmental law. EcoLex has been designed to be most comprehensive global source of information on national and international environmental law. Entire spectrum of environmental subjects it covers, maybe from the marine area through the climate change, energy, land, soil, species, forestry, waste, food, agriculture, etc. Now coming back to role of courts and judiciary in India especially, and also the lawmakers. It will be too much for me because already in the presence of Justice Swatanter Kumar ji, and but I will touch these issues very little. Some of the historical milestone related to the ecological or environmental governance in India, our 42nd Amendment of the Constitution of India, adding Article 48A and 51AG, and then right to life, various judicial pronouncements, the famous Godavarman case, which has shaped the further regulation of the forest diversion issues, and also generation of the resources, financial resources for restoration of the forest landscape restoration through the Campa Fund. Then various type of judgments in relation to the oleum gas leak case and the landmark case on the environmental law, which was based on the public trust doctrine, MC Mehta versus Kamal Nath. A number of such judgments I have witnessed Justice Swatanter Kumar ji, and I have also attended as an official in his court, and I have really learned a lot during the court proceedings, and with the passionate way in which Justice Swatanter Kumar sir has given those pronouncements, and that is really, they are the really eye-openers for every section of the society, how we should take care of the environment ourselves. And now when we talk of the pleasant surprises during the COVID-19 crisis, this gives us some sort of a baseline or eye-opener that what should be our surroundings. Suddenly we were witnessing the rivers are clean, cleaner air, new shades of green, blue sky in the Delhi city, children are witnessing twinkling of the star, snow-clad mountains are visible from the distant cities, peacocks, bird chirping, and increasing visibility of all forms of wildlife, even in the city, they are the pleasant surprises. I think this is the surrounding environment that should be the aim. And the business models or all the activities, they should ensure that whatever way they develop their business models, we have to aim that we have to provide society the surrounding cleaner air, the cleaner water, cleaner sources of drinking water, the cleaner sky, and very little pollution and very reduced impact on the environment. Because ultimately, if we have disconnect with the nature, we don't care for the nature, such type of pandemic threat will always be there. And rather than having growth model, which looking for the growth and profit in the business model, if suddenly such type of event occurs, then entire world comes at the halt, and all the business cycles change, they have disrupted. So business models, when they will be focusing on the revival, renewal, and reconstruction, they have to reintrospect and redefine their role in valuing, restoring, and protecting the natural world on which we all depend. They have to be self-compliant and redefine. Business practices need to be integrated. They should pledge for the zero pollution of the water resources, ambient air, efficient waste recycling, land degradation neutrality, biodiversity conservation, adhering to the strictest environmental standards, and integration of the ecological ethics and morality in the business practices. And this will be key for meeting the mitigation as well as adaptation targets. So what we need to relook when we are talking of at the same time the role of judiciary and courts in ensuring adaptation and mitigation, but at the same time, if we ourselves become ecologically disciplined, then we have to look in what way we want to develop our cities. This is the lesson. What way we grow our food with the less of chemicals. We have to go for the more and more organic things. We have to ensure that we don't degrade our land. Soil health is a very important factor. The way we develop our business, the way we respect and value nature, the way we conserve species, the way we degrade natural resources, the way our consumption is, and the way we recycle our waste. Overall, the way we inhabit and care for the planet Earth. So we need to pledge that if I am not polluting, I will not degrade nature, I will love wildlife, I will not allow others to harm nature. And who has to pledge? All the policymakers, all the governance framework for the ecological governance, all the businesses, all the communities, all the stakeholders, all the geographies. And we presently, when we are seeing planet Earth is under repair, though under the Paris Climate Change Agreement, we have submitted national NDC targets, and Justice Look just mentioned that even if we meet all the NDC commitments, we are going to have increase in the temperature of 3.2 degrees centigrade. So now if we don't take care of the nature, we don't integrate ecological ethics ourselves, the nature will itself settle the things. And accordingly now when we are seeing itself that surrounding air and all environment has become cleaner, so their nature has its own way to correct the things. So rather than by waiting for nature to take care and correct the things, we should ourselves take care, and we should at least preserve what is left of nature. With these words, I thank you once again for giving me this opportunity for sharing my views for today's webinar. And again, on behalf of the IUCN also, I thank organizers, also Honorable Justice Swatanter Kumar ji, Honorable Justice Look, Professor Chandrasekhar, and everyone. And ultimate solution is that nature has to be told in a very, very simple definition. So we should not make the definition of the environment or very, very complicated. So it has to be adopted by each and everyone, that at the local level in our surroundings, we have to ensure that we have the minimum footprint so that the nature is not degraded. We take care for the nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saxena. Again, some of the points that you mentioned, especially 13 principles of environmental rule of law, is extremely beneficial, and it was put in such an uncomplicated way that your final statement about uncomplicating environment has been personified by your own good self. We will be taking live questions now, so I'd be happy to consider any raised hands that have been raised in the meanwhile. I'd also quickly let our participants know that it was my fault that I mentioned at the beginning that Dr. Saxena is the trifecta of bureaucracy, government, and intergovernmental organization. For those of you who are wondering why he is so well versed with the law, he's also a qualified lawyer. So just so all of you know, he is actually a quadrifactor of all things environment rolled into one. And it is our pleasure to have you with us, Dr. Saxena, and thank you so much for your insightful talk. As we will move on to audio questions and raised hands, we have got a multitude of very interesting questions, and I'm almost proud of the kind of questions that we've got. So I'd start with Justice Kumar. One of the very interesting questions that has come up, sir, is about how in countries like India, especially, where judiciary is already doing so much, and your good self has been at the helm of environmental judiciary for quite some time, there is still a laxity in terms of execution and monitoring. And is there a certain way where this could be fixed in the long term? How the executive branch, the legislature, and the judiciary, all of them could work together? One, because as of now, there seems to be too much burden on the judiciary. And secondly, what, according to you, this is from all the young lawyers around the globe, what, according to you, makes a good environmental lawyer? The questions have been asked by Mrs. Charu Sharma and an anonymous question as well. So you're on mute, sir. It'll be in the bottom left.
Yeah. Now, see, what I feel is that I will answer the later part of the question first and then go to the earlier part of the question. See, to be a good environmental lawyer, I think all you need is a good heart, you know, and which does have a brain which thinks a feeling of fairness to environment. Once you have these two elements and you work hard, I don't see a reason that why you can't be a good environmental lawyer. And let me tell you, to be on the right side of the track, environmental lawyers are making good money all over the globe today. So that should be an incentive for you. The second thing is that, yes, there is execution of judicially with regard to different orders has been an issue across the globe. It's not very particular in India. It's all over the world because the orders that are passed by the regulating authorities or by the courts are not easy to carry out. So they can carry economic burden on the industry or on the burden. So there is a catch up. But yes, the best way out is, as I said in my talk also, the policy framers should be field oriented. They should know what is happening on the field so that the restrictions they impose are not impractical. There should be total update on technology applicable and a technology which is least harmful to the nature. Thirdly, there has to be a collective and conscious effort, not only of the legislator, judicially, and the regulatory authorities, but most importantly of the people at large. Unless and until the public at large would become conscious of environment protection, nothing can be done. You know, when people want to do it, now you see COVID-19, now people wanted to do it, you don't see people on the road, you're working from home, you're holding webinars on this like this. So this is all is a creation of the human mind. So we need a collective concerted effort, and I'm sure we can do good.
Thank you so much, sir. Absolutely on point. I think that covers both the questions quite holistically and in detail. I'd move on to Justice Luke. There's a very interesting question that has come from Charvi Kumar, and it's on Paris Agreement. And she's saying that it is understood that the Paris Agreement has very ambitious goals, and it is still an effort in process where every country can come together and contribute towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. But eventually the question is the Paris Agreement still enough? Or are there other factors that will need to be taken underway to actually give a shape to the concept of climate adaptation and climate mitigation?
I think it's a difficult question to answer. The first answer could be the Paris Agreement is a sort of turning system in that sense that in the Paris Agreement you have the two main objectives, but there is also a sort of mechanism for periodical review in the right sense, because it's not written like that, but the principle of it's not a principle of non-regression, it's the principle of progression, which is written down in the Paris Agreement. So I think it was probably the best possible agreement that could be reached in 2015, but it's only a starting point. It's a mechanism. So now, for the first time, these national determined contributions have to be reviewed and have to reviewed looking to the gap report I mentioned, should be reviewed in a more ambitious way. And this is a mechanism that the different member states, the different parties to the agreement are looking to each other. It's a sort of peer review process. So the answer is it enough? Yes and no. Yes, it could be enough. No, it's not enough if it's only the text and if the implementation and the follow up is not following. That's the first thing. And the second thing, I think it's very important that we take climate change not as a separate subject, but it's combined with the issue of biodiversity. So I think the loss of biodiversity, on the one hand, is one of the causes of climate change, but also nature and nature-based solutions can also help. So there was already, I think, by Justice Kumar and also by Dr. Saxena, a reference to the huge plantation projects in Ethiopia. So we have to if you see what's deforestation, what is going on, this is just the wrong thing to do. So we have to reverse this. We have to plant trees. So I mentioned that we have a regulation in Europe that there would be any loss anymore of forest cover. Today, in the newspaper, there are reports about satellite survey in Europe that we are losing forests. So we have to work on those two tracks together, I think, and one can reinforce the other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justice Luke. I think you're absolutely right. Just the fact that it's the first step in the right direction is an achievement in itself. But because of the dynamism and the ever-changing models of climate change, we have to be very flexible as we decide on our future goals going forward. Dr. Saxena, I'll come to you before we take on the next audio question, because this one is right up your alley and it is something that you've worked on for a long time. The question is in relation to, it has two aspects. So one is the intersectionality of climate change itself. As you mentioned, there's food security, there's water issues, there's this advent of gender justice, community justice, equity, equality. So what are your views on such a diverse problem? And having solutions to such diverse problems can be very tricky instead of going to a particular issue wise instead of global issue. And the second thing is that when we include these community issues, you include air issues, water issues, biodiversity, forest issues, do you think that somehow complicates the whole idea of achieving a solution of climate change when you start scampering to various issues instead of addressing the main issue at hand?
Yeah.
This question is by Mr. Madhukar Sharma, by the way. Congratulations, Madhukar. It's a very good question.
Yeah, thank you so much, and really very good question. And the basic answer, if we start with, I started that we should take care of the nature and look to the nature for the solutions. And what nature has provided equal right to everyone. So accordingly, when we take care of the community, or maybe talk of the gender, maybe for your emission, you don't have a right to degrade your surrounding environment, because nature has provided you enough environment to survive. And this very much environment, if you are degrading, then you are at fault. And when you are talking of the solution, when you maybe involving the community, you have to take care of the community, because the approach, if we see that we talk of the environment, but we say, okay, our surrounding environment is good, but not in my backyard. So if outside your backyard, you are throwing your waste and not thinking about that, how it is being further finding the end result and where it is finally getting disposed, whether it is degrading land, it is polluting the water resources. Similarly, when we talk of the circular economy, the business practices, they are producing a particular product, but it goes from the various, you can say, business chain. And in that process, if it is degrading the nature, it is polluting, it is creating in the process, it is emissions are there, and you are not taking care of discharge of the effluents. So all this, what type of chemicals you use. So these 13 principles which I mentioned as per the IUCN First World Conservation Congress, and in totality, they take care of all those things. And if we take care of these things, because development also has to go, but at the same time, as Honorable Justice Swatanter Kumarji also told, that technology also, the clean technology, because then again comes the issue between the developed world and developing world, because developing world, we also have a right to develop further. In the name of having the carbon space and like that, the poor people, they can't be denied their right to develop further. So how to ensure a balance? We have to also provide technology, the clean technology, the required finance and the correct planning, right intervention at the global level. When we talk of all these conventions like NDC targets or Paris Agreement, the thing is we have all into agreement. The main issue is how to implement it and ensure its implementation at the grassroots level, because all the solutions lie at the grassroots level. And again, that's why Justice Luke also reiterated that nature-based solutions we have to look for there. And if we have any doubt for any of the thing, the nature has to be given favor. So I think that answers the question, because question had covered a number of aspects of all those issues. So gender, community, technology, climate change, mitigation, adaptation, they all can be, I think, summarized if we take care of the nature. And we need to be serious, sincere in all our initiatives. And everyone has to, maybe the government, maybe the business, maybe the local community, maybe the rural community, only through our education process. We need to sensitize them. We need to make them aware. We have to provide right environment, livable conditions for everyone with good clean sources of water, good land, ensuring soil health. These are the key for meeting the targets, maybe the NDC targets, climate change agreement, adaptation, mitigation, in whatever terminology we speak.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saxena. And given the fact that it was a very complicated question, I must congratulate you for having covered all the bases of the answer that could possibly be. And just the whole idea that climate change in its essence is like a Rubik's Cube with different sides. And just because you get one side of the same color or one side right does not mean that you've solved the whole cube as a problem. So taking a cue from that, we shall, I must also apologize to our esteemed panelists, because we're getting very greedy to have all of this knowledge on our panel, and we have kind of gone over the allotted time. We'll just take one last question, and then we'll move on to Dr. Ravanle for his concluding remarks on the session. So Akshay, if you can hear me, can you unmute Ashia, and then we could probably take up her question as well?
Sure, Eeshan. Arshia, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question live? Arshia, this is last and final call for you to unmute yourself and ask your question live. Otherwise, we'll proceed. Thank you. Eeshan, let's proceed.
Yeah, so I must, before I give the dais and the topic of discussion to Dr. Ravanle, I must...
I'm sorry to interrupt, Eeshan. We have a request to have all the questions addressed in Q&A box. I will leave it on you to see if you can address. As far as the logistics at the back end are concerned, we've extended it by another hour. I'll leave it on the gentleman now.
I'm sure the panelists have constraints of time. So what we'll do is whatever questions that we have received, and this is to all the audience members, if there are any other questions, I've already given my email ID. You could write to me. I can forward your questions to the esteemed panelists, and we could take it further from there. As of now, I think because of the constraint of time and the paucity of time, we'll move on to the concluding remarks, Dr. Ravanle. After I congratulate the eminent panelists for dealing with such a complicated discussion with such clarity and suaveness. So I must thank you all of you for joining us. And must I also thank Dr. Ravanle, if our eminent, experienced and knowledgeable panelists are the flesh and blood of environmental jurisprudence and government and intergovernmental organizations. Dr. Ravanle is very much the soul which resides in the educational system of India when it comes to environmental jurisprudence. So I must cede the floor to Dr. Ravanle for his concluding remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Eeshan. And it was indeed a pleasure to hear to the noteworthy wisdom which was served to us in the form of words formed by statements and then the intelligent way of presentation. But my one introduction, which is that I'm the proud teacher of wonderful students like Eeshan. So that is my first introduction. And please allow me that I may like to cite some verbs from the ancient jurisprudence. And when we talk about it, so it would be the language Sanskrit. I would, of course, explain it in English as well, and I'll not take more than 3 minutes. Well, it was indeed a pleasure because there are two words which have been spoken nowadays interchangeably. Either it is regulation or governance. I see that when it comes to courts, then of course it's a regulation. But when it comes to the policy, it lays down the structure for our own governance. And there are two words which people, I feel, as a learner of law, we have forgotten. That is called as adapt and adopt. People just say that let us adapt to the situation, but they do not want to mend their ways and adopt to the ways it will take them further and we will flourish. So today when we are struggling for a better environment, well, the ancient jurisprudence in the form of, when it comes to India, Vedas, it has taught us, guided us to take steps for the protection of clean environment. Be it Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda or Atharveda, they all recognize the importance of maintaining the seasonal cycles that leads to climatic changes, largely due to, I would like to praise, inappropriate human behavior and actions. If you go back to the old days, which we have read in our books, the ancients treated nature holistically, giving utmost reverence to preserving its various entities and elements. Mata Bhumi, Prutuhana Pruthvya, earth is my mother and I am her son. And which son or daughter would like to harm mother? So we started with that. So much was the respect for the mother earth. We always call it as a mother earth. So this slok clearly indicates the relationship of humans with earth, comparing it to like a mother and a child, inferring that one should not harm either the environment or its flora and fauna. There were references made to water. In Hindi or Sanskrit, we refer it as Jal. So water from time immemorial has always been an important natural resource, need for sustaining life. Well, in ancient ages, we faced problem, but the water availability issue was only in terms of distance. However, today, water availability itself is a problem with staring scarcity due to excessive pollution. So there is a Matsya Puran 154.512 I would like to cite. Dasha Kupasama Vapi, Dasha Vapi Samo Vrudaya. Dasha Vrudaya Samaha Putro, Dasha Putra Samo Drumaha. A pond equals 10 wells and a reservoir equals 10 ponds. A sun equals 10 reservoirs and a tree equals 10 suns. So when we talk about it, what does it inform us? That it is our foremost duty that we should take care of the natural resources. The reference to the word sun does not mean what we see as a gender differentiation. It is a term which is just used to bring that closeness between us. So what is given to us by the God Almighty, we have to respect, but yes, we don't have to utilize it, but we also have to stand for its recreation. And that's what all three learned panelists were suggesting to all of us. And why do we require people to tell us, why can we not learn it by ourselves? Because somebody was talking other day with respect to the experiences due to COVID in India or abroad. One news, I don't know, to great extent did not make it to several channels. Some channels did show it, but the water of Ganges, after a long time, were felt to be like the pure Ganges. And nobody, everybody knows the answer, why it is polluted. We know the answer, but we still are trying to figure out the way to reach to that answer. And all the panelists, they have rightfully informed to us about the climate mitigation and adaptation through codes and policy. It always has been a pleasure to hear Honorable Mr. Justice Swatanter Kumar. Well, I have heard sir as a student. I have heard student when he visited different institutions, be it in Pune, be it Symbiosis or be it ILS as well. And occasionally I have visited the National Green Tribunal if some important proceedings were happening, and we could sit and just listen to that. And you have made that difference, sir. Whether it was at the Supreme Court of India or different high courts, but greatly I refer that to your tenure at the National Green Tribunal. And thank you very much. We owe that big thank you to you for bringing that rich jurisprudence and the involvement of the persons who have the professional experience as part of the National Green Tribunal. That goes to you, sir. Honorable Mr. Justice Luke, I heard about you, I read about you, and when we were deciding about this panel discussion, your name came first. And when I talked to Eeshan just jumped with it. He said, that I know. And I said, we should have. And Dr. Vivek, thank you very much for joining, because Eeshan talks highly about you, your work and etc. And on behalf of everyone around the world who is attending this panel discussion, I would like to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. And I sincerely enjoyed this session. But with sincere urge to everyone who is participating, we should not be taught how to take care of the environment. We are part of the environment itself. So start taking care of yourself. You will take care of the environment. Thank you very much, everyone. Namaskar. Over to you, Eeshan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ravanle. Again, I would just like to conclude with a bit of a vote of thanks to Justice Kumar, not just for being the green judge of India and Asia and the globe, but for for including and instilling in every lawyer that want to be an environmental lawyer. And I think if there's I cannot think of a better gift to the world of environment than instilling a sense of pride, a sense of curiosity in every young professional to take up environment as a vocation. So thank you so much, Justice Kumar. Justice Luke, it's just a pleasure to hear your thoughts, your diverse experience as a lecturer, as a functionary, as a judge has been an incredible beneficial ride for all of us who just latch on to the thought of hearing you speak. So thank you so much for being with us. And Dr. Saxena, as I mentioned already, we've during the course of this talk, we've added various things that you are. So we started with 2. Then we reached the trifecta of government, bureaucracy, and intergovernmental organization. And then we also realized that you're also a lawyer. So now you're a combination of various facets and the perfect representative for India at the international level, at the IUCN or in any other governmental organization. So thank you so much, Dr. Saxena, for having us. Thank you, Lex Witness, for having organized such a wonderful panel. Thank you, Dr. Ravanle. As I mentioned, you're the soul of environmental jurisprudence and education in India. And thank you finally to all the participants. The questions were great. I again apologize. We could not take up all the questions, but I will personally get back to you. Thank you so much for being a part of this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. I will now be ending the webinar for all the attendees. Thank you so much for your valuable time.
Thank you, everyone.